Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest. You know, one of the first things I learned in the small business space is that most people don't realize when they start a business, they should also have some idea of how they want to exit the business. And in between, there's an awful lot more. And we have with us today Marc Morgenstern, who's going to talk about that and about his new book. Marc, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Mark, as we ask all of our guests, first tell us a little bit about yourself personally, and then the second question is why you wrote a book, uh, and then finally where people can get it. So, Mark, it's all yours.
Okay. So my background is the word I use is eclectic. The word my wife uses is unfocused. And that's because concurrently I was the managing partner of a law firm and a deal lawyer and a real estate syndicator and a venture capitalist and ran a couple of funds and did a lot of teaching and writing of articles. And that background to me made perfect sense. It's hard to explain to people. They expect careers to be sequential. And then 15 years ago, I stopped practicing law completely. And since then, I was the executive vice president of a Los Angeles company called Divergent, which is transforming manufacturing around the world, and the senior advisor to Lounge Buddy, which we sold to American Express. That was a San Francisco company. And now I have two titles at the House Fund. It's UC Berkeley's $150 million venture fund. One title is part-time partner, but the title I really like is the mentor at large. And my sort of role is to work with the CEOs of the portfolio companies, which is fabulous. These are incredibly smart people, and they're growing businesses, and they haven't done growing businesses before. And it's a very distinct skill set.
Hmm. Okay. So now you're doing all this, and you had time to write a book. Why did you write the book?
Yeah, what I probably should have added in the first part is music is a huge part of my life, always has been. I've been on the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame since 1994, which was a year before we opened it. And I've been on the board of the Rex Foundation, which is the San Francisco nonprofit founded by the Grateful Dead for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years, something like that. And with that as background and having done literally hundreds of deals, I like to mentor people, and usually you do that one-on-one, whether it's someone in your own firm or somebody that I'm investing in, but it's one-time mentoring. And at some point, you sort of say to yourself, or at least I said to myself, I've got all of this stuff which has taken 4 decades to acquire. Wouldn't it be nice to amortize that knowledge and share it with other people and inform them? So most, or at least my understanding is most business books are written for two reasons. One is it's either sort of a vanity book, and this isn't that, as you'll see, because I talk about a lot of mistakes. And the other is because you're trying to promote a business or a consulting service or something. And I'm not doing that either. This really is intended to let other people benefit from it, learn from it, do their own deals better, run their own lives better.
Hmm. And so the name of the book and where people can get it.
Well, it happens that it's the soul of the deal. They can get it in Amazon, Barnes and Noble, most independent booksellers. And the thing that makes it pretty different, and well, there are lots of things that make it different, but one of them is my fundamental thesis is I learned how to do everything I do by selling encyclopedias door to door as a teenager and then following the Grateful Dead for a lifetime.
Hmm.
People think I mean that metaphorically, and I actually mean it quite literally. You know, encyclopedia selling, I don't know, did you ever sell anything door to door?
No, I've sold, but no, well, no. The answer, it's got to be heartrending.
I would bet a lot of people in your audience have, and I would tell you it is the single best experience for anything you can have, because they sort of drop you off at a corner like at 6 o'clock. They're going to pick you up at 9 o'clock. Excuse me. And in between, you're going to be knocking on a lot of doors of people who don't know who you are. You're in a strange place. You're a stranger. You're trying to get them to open their door, let you in, and then you have someplace between 5 minutes and an hour to sell someone something they weren't planning on buying that night. So you learn a bunch of things. One of it, so the soul of the deal partly is you pound the pavement. You literally, it is the soul, SOLE, of the deal, right? You're pound, 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 pound. And probably if you knock on 100 doors and you're really good, you know, five of them might open. And if you're really good, two of them might let you in. And if you're really good, one of them will buy the encyclopedia. And so you learn that while rejection is unpleasant, it's not likely to kill you, right? And that's kind of a key criterion in almost every business and everybody's life is someone's going to say no, that's okay, move on to the next gig. Or now that they're engaged with you and they're saying no, that's the beginning of a conversation. Hey, just let me ask you, why did you say no? It kind of surprises me because you looked like a guy who'd say yes. And all of a sudden you're talking with somebody who didn't want to talk with you. And then probably the two other major lessons from encyclopedia selling um, are what motivates people to buy. And the concept that if you're in houses, house 1, 2, and 3, house number 2 is completely different than house number 1 and 3. You can never guess or assume why somebody wants to buy something. And the first rule of selling is find out what someone wants to buy and then sell it to them. So you might say to yourself, well, Mark, an encyclopedia is this big and it weighs this much. And how can it be something different? And the answer is sort of the magic of framing. So you're talking with somebody and you're doing what I think you should always do, which is listening way more than you talk. And you've asked them to tell their life story and they've shared some of it. And with some of them, you would then respond, well, wow, an encyclopedia is really the way to your kids getting into college. It's an avenue to education. Somebody else might make it clear that they're very much into aesthetics. The bookcase will look perfect in my living room, in that corner over there. Okay, if they want to buy aesthetics, I'm going to sell aesthetics. I'm going to stop talking about college. Someone else literally might just, I want people to think I'm smarter than I am. It's a status symbol. You don't guess. You talk with open-ended questions, just like you're doing now, right? You gave me a wide space to talk into and see what comes out of it. So house 1 and house 2 and house 3 will be different sales and different methods. And that concept that every sale, every negotiation, you start by figuring out who your counterparty is, right? In a door-to-door, the counterparty is the customer, right? I'm one counterparty, they're the other counterparty. One of the great things about encyclopedia selling is you don't use the words that people tend to use in deals. The buyer calls the seller's team the enemy or the other side. They use very militaristic terms, or they use terms that separate them. Well, certainly my customer is not my enemy. So that word would just never crop up. They're my counterparty. And so you approach the world as everybody is a counterparty. They're not an enemy. They're someplace in the deal circle with me. And my job is to figure out who they are and what they want and then sell it to them. Last major lesson is having, they gave you a 1-page printed non-negotiable form. And that was great because now you've eliminated a barrier to closing. There's nothing to negotiate. You either sign this piece of paper or you don't sign this piece of paper. I have no discretion. That's great. And then you sign the piece of paper, you get a check. And the real key is then you leave the house immediately. You don't stay, you don't talk longer, you don't give people a chance to, why did I buy that encyclopedia? I mean, we haven't taken a vacation in 22 years. Why did we do that? You don't want to give people time to have buyer's remorse. It's not just seller's remorse, it's buyer's remorse. So if I'm standing talking with those folks for another 45 minutes, only bad things can happen. There's not a single good thing that can happen out of my staying there. I'm not going to sell 2 encyclopedias. So why am I still there? Sign the check, leave the house immediately. The Dead is the Grateful Dead. I don't know. Are you familiar with the Grateful Dead?
Well, I am, but I'm too old for them. They're passe for me.
Okay. Well, for anyone who's had the pleasure of hearing the Grateful Dead, you would know that you want to see them live in a concert.
Yes.
And a concert is very different than hearing one of their studio albums. And part of it is to me that they understood all the encyclopedia lessons. So they never played the same song twice. One night they might play Bertha for 3 minutes, and 5 nights later it might be 32 minutes. And the reason is they were responding to a different audience in a different venue with different acoustics, and they were all feeling different. And they didn't judge themselves and say, well, the 3 minute version was better. They said the 3 minute version is different. And so you get the concept that there are lots of potential deals you can do. They may be a different mosaic, but they can all be good, and they're not going to be identical. So the Grateful Dead started with, who is this audience? What are they responding to? And when you're a musician, I played in college bands. It's pretty easy to tell whether or not people like what you're doing. They either dance or they don't dance. So if they're dancing, you're doing something good, you might want to do more of it. If they're not dancing, change what you're doing, right? Have the flexibility to change. So they created a sort of call and response with their audience. They'd pump out energy at the audience would respond, that would feed the dead, that would change what they were doing, they would send it back to the audience. That two-way communication, that two-way, I'm dealing with this specific audience, this specific night, and I'm not going to play what I played some other night for a different audience in a different venue. And that's the secret to, not the secret, strike that. That's a key to negotiating almost anything. Is you don't walk in with, there's only one way to do it. You walk into, how do I figure out who this human being is? How do I make sure they trust me? How do I get some sense of their background? How do I get some sense of, when they use a word, what do they mean? Right? How do I draw implications? And does their shoulder go up when they're tense? Do their eyebrows go up? Do their voice raise? I want all of the cues that you can get that are physical and visual. And that's the same thing you got selling encyclopedias. You walked in that front door, you could smell the food in the kitchen, right? You could hear what was being played on a radio. You could see what was in their living room, the pictures, there aren't pictures, there are books, there aren't books. There's a New York Yankees pennant on the wall. Well, I'm probably not going to talk to them about the Cleveland Indians. So without working hard at it, if you learn that you've got 5 senses, and why wouldn't you want to use them? See, hear, taste, touch, feel. And that sort of granular relationship with people gets you a very long way.
So if I hear you right, you're saying be flexible in your approach to when you're selling, and be flexible in your approach when making the deal. Am I?
No, that's completely right. And it's, there are, if I took the exact opposite, if you're negotiating a loan and the bank gives you their form documents, the banker is doing the same deal they did the day before, the day before, the day before, and the day before, right? They've got a very narrow world. They don't have a lot of flexibility, and the bank doesn't want them to have a lot of flexibility. It's pretty close to encyclopedia pre-printed form. If I'm a buyer and I'm talking to a seller, or I'm a seller talking to a buyer, I don't know what the buyer wants. And if it's a private company, which most of my deals are, I don't know what the seller thinks their business is worth. I don't know why they think it's worth it. I've got to find out those things. And then you figure out, well, with this person, here's an easy example. The CEO makes it clear that after the deal closes, they want to be there for 5 more years, right? I love running my business. I just want to get cash. I want to get liquid. And so you're going to start building a deal based around, they're going to be there for 5 years. That's a key part of the economics. Lots of other sellers that what they say is, hey, I want to retire. Retire means you never see me again. So I'll hang out for 30 days after the closing, and then bye-bye. And that's going to be a different deal and a different structure, because you've got to figure out, do you have the internal people here to carry on, or do I need to import a new CEO? Those are different deals because you're responding to what your counterparty really wants. And it isn't always just the money, right? People do things for all kinds of reasons. So you're trying to be a sort of psychological detective and figure out what is really driving this person to do this. And by the way, they may not understand what's really driving them, right? That's why one of my maxims is ideally, negotiation is a mutual education and exploration process. So I'm educating you about me. You're educating me about your business. I'm learning. We're exploring different structures that might work. And I'm perfectly happy at a negotiating table to say, hey, I hear what you're saying. I don't think that's going to float my boat. But if you want to explore it for 10 or 15 minutes and figure out the logical consequences, we can talk about it as long as you know exploration is not commitment. The fact that I'm willing to explore it doesn't mean I've agreed to it. So let's explore it and see what we learn from it. That's also an indicia of flexibility.
Mark, let me interrupt you. Your book again and where people can get it?
The soul of the deal. The subtitle is Creative Frameworks for Buying, Selling, and Investing in Any Business. The easiest is to go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble. If you want to get it online, you can get it usually the next day. Um, and it has 50 of Morgenstern's maxims, many of which apply to living, not just deals. And sometimes people ask me what my favorite one is. I won't tell them that, but I will tell them what everybody else's favorite is, which is an expectation unarticulated is a disappointment guaranteed.
Hmm. I got to keep that in mind. But I have to tell you, over 30 years ago, I interviewed John Y. Brown, if you
Yeah,
remember him. And, he started out as an encyclopedia salesman. And he said almost exactly the same things you said. I was like listening to him when you were talking about how he went about selling. It was amazing.
it's what you learn. Another maxim is people, not spreadsheets, are the epicenter of every deal. They're
Hmm.
also the epicenter of every sale. And if you start with the concept that there are a lot of ways to be human, you don't have a lock on it. This other person's a different person. They're not a mirror. Of course, you're going to find out about them. And it's all about emotion and human beings. It's not about the math.
But but it seems to me, particularly in this day and age, we're not looking at what the other person wants or needs, but what we need being an overriding consideration.
Yes, I think well, first of all, I think that's a mistake. I also think it's a consequence of how a lot of communication is conducted right now. So I send an email or a text, they send an email or a text, I send an email or a text. And what you get isn't a dialogue. What you're getting is sequential monologue, right? Nobody's really hearing it. And so one of my rules is, first of all, the fact that somebody sent me a text doesn't mean I can't pick up the phone and call them. So I want to do this in real time. I want to hear your reaction to what I have to say. And I want to hear if your reaction makes me think, oh, I was pushing too hard. You know what? They've got a fair point. I'll back off of that one. You can do that if you're in a room with people. You can do that on a Zoom. You can do that on a phone. You can't do it with digital communication. And there's a whole generation growing up now that thinks that digital communication is connection, and it isn't. It just flat out isn't. So part of the reason, going back to you asked why I wrote the book, there's a tremendous amount of learning in this book that I don't think is easy for people to access in today's world. There are not going to be a lot of people selling encyclopedias door to door. And post COVID, there are not even a lot of people who spend time with people. I taught at Berkeley last year. I taught a course called Street Smart Startups. Really brilliant students. And one of them was a mother, I don't know, in her 30s. And after class, we were talking, and she said, well, I'm so worried because my son is 2. He's never really played with anybody his age. He doesn't see anybody. How is he going to learn empathy? And I said, and actually, what she also said was, and how am I going to teach it to him?
Hmm.
My answer was, well, first of all, if you're smart enough to ask the question, I guarantee you, you'll figure it out, right? Because you're focused on the right issue. That creation of empathy is what's missing in most deals. And people sometimes think that is a sign of weakness. I think that's the ultimate sign of strength, right? I know who I am well enough that I'll tell you whether or not this is a good deal or not a good deal when we get all done with it. And if it's not a good deal, I'm not going to do it. But why wouldn't I do it as friction free as possible by finding the 20 things you want and saying, I really don't care about 18 of them. I mean, they don't add up to a hill of beans. Great. They're two that you really care about that I also really care about. And we're going to have hand to hand on those two. But if I've given you the 18, you're a lot more likely to give me the two I really need. And so the ability to distinguish between it's nice to have compared to I need to have it is something that's key to making successful deals. You know what you can give up. You can compromise without feeling compromised. And you only get to compromise through dialogue, not sequential monologue.
Yes, but I guess my question then to you, a lot of people don't know what they really want or really
Correct.
need. They'll sell their company and then realize, uh, what are they going to do? Start another company?
Yeah.
Or, uh, I see it all the time in some of the people we talk to in our surveys, particularly people who have solar business because their children don't want to be in the business.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is the one that seems to be. Do you see that at all?
Yes, and it's something you have to be super sensitive to. Dealing generally, buying a company from a founder is very different than buying it from a private equity fund. Private equity fund's identity is not wrapped up in the company. The founder is somebody who probably started with no money, scratched and clawed for a couple of years, built a business, had good times and bad times, maybe almost didn't make it, persuaded people to come join them as employees. And their identity is I'm the CEO and founder of ABC company. If they're not that owner and CEO, they don't have any identity. And you have people who literally say to you, I used to be somebody, now I'm nothing. So if you identify that as a real need early on, right, then you think about things like, well, maybe I want to make them the senior strategic advisor for 5 years. They've got a title and I give them an office and they can tell all their friends, hey, this company thinks I'm so valuable that they're still keeping me on for 5 years and the CEO doesn't make a move without me or
Hmm.
whatever they're going to say. The office says, you're part of the ongoing entity. If they're really going to have nothing, you're going to have a very hard time making the sale unless they have to sell it. And frequently, you only succeed as the buyer if you're like the fifth buyer. The CEOs say no to the first four, and sometimes what you learn in those kinds of discussions is, you just say, hey, this has been great. I understand you've got a lot of angst here. You've got a lot of things you got to think about. Let's just put it aside and maybe we'll talk in 3 or 4 months. Maybe we'll talk in 12 months. I don't want you to be uncomfortable. It's not going to be a good deal if you're not comfortable. So you might want to go away and think about it. Come back. We'll talk about it. See if I can accommodate what you want to have after the sale, and I can find a way to make it work. Walking away like that, not angrily, you're just saying, I know this is a difficult set of circumstances. If we keep pounding on it, we're going to make it worse. You know, and you don't want to make it worse. So you want to leave people laughing. You want to leave so that if you re-engage with them, they smile when they hear your name. Yeah, I remember Mark. He was the nice guy who let me off the hook and, prevented me from making a terrible mistake. Sure, if Mark wants to talk with me again, I'm happy to talk with him. And now the person's 3 months or 12 months or 9 months later, and they've been thinking about it, and maybe it's not a new idea to them anymore. Now they've sort of see, hey, if I sell my business, one of the possibilities is I won't be connected with it. Maybe they talk with their family about it. Maybe they get deeply involved in a nonprofit. I don't know what they're going to do, but it gives them breathing space to figure out who they want to be after a sale. And if they can figure that out, then I can figure out the rest.
Well, I guess my next question is, of the people that are left behind, that to me, I mean, I've just worked with somebody 2 weeks ago, just before New Year's, where he sold a company and literally just came in the door one day and said, "I sold the company, goodbye," and without. And the employees who worked, some of whom worked with him for 15 to 20 years, were left with nothing except a new boss.
Yeah.
And it seems that he hasn't considered them. And is that a consideration?
For some CEOs, it absolutely is. And that tends to come out in the early meetings. They'll say something like, I'm assuming you're going to keep all my people on, just double checking with you that my assumption is reasonable. Is that the plan? Right. Um, I'd like to talk with the employees at other companies that you own to see how they think they're being treated. I don't want to hear how you think they're being treated. I want to hear how they think they're being treated. And then you're making very difficult decisions, because in most companies, you would hope that it doesn't depend on just the one CEO owner. There are two or three or four other people that really make the place run. And you're going to probably want to involve them very late in the negotiations, but you're going to want them to be in the negotiations so they don't have exactly what you just said. I walk in one day and I have no idea what's going on. The danger, by the way, and the reason you do it at the very end is some of them just won't want it. People hate change. You could say we're selling it to Mahatma Gandhi, and they would say, "Terrible guy," right? He's different. Some people will say, "Well, if you really need me in this meeting, then I'm pretty important to this business. Then I should be getting some more on the sale, right? Or somebody should be giving me a guaranteed contract, or pay me for a non-competition fee, or one way or the other. I'm at the feeding trough." So you want people, the important people, to be comfortable with it. They won't always be, right? Your best buyer may be somebody who isn't going to do any of those things, but they're going to pay you $100 and no one else will pay more than 10. And probably most people are going to sell it to the one who's going to pay 100. That's not a moral judgment. That's just an observation, right?
Well, I was on the board of we sold a company 2 years ago, and we were promised absolutely that we would the employees would be kept on, and within 3 months of us selling, every one of our key employees were gone, and it really hurt me because we asked the question. But anyway, that's
Well,
me.
but that's also why you talk to employees at other companies they own, right? If
Well, I
there's
did. And
oh
the rest of the board members, I said this was going to happen. The rest of the board members said, we don't care. And you have no idea how that's bothered me over those 2 years.
yeah, for what it's worth, I think that means you're a good human being.
Uh, I try to be. When I go to heaven, St. Peter's going to ask. Uh, anyway, we're coming close to the end of our time. Mark, your book again and how people can get it?
The Soul of the Deal. Go to Amazon.com right now. It's in Kindle, it's in audio, it's in hardcover. And by the way, the narrator on the Audible did a fabulous job. And by complete coincidence, he also was the narrator for the Grateful Dead's drummer, Bill Kreutzmann, wrote a book called Deal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same narrator.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, the Grateful Dead come racing into my life at the least expected place. He did a fabulous job.
So, what would you like to leave our audience with?
The first thing you should be thinking about in any set of circumstances, it doesn't matter if you're a teacher, a parent, a business owner, a buyer, or a seller, think about the other person and their needs and their realities. And if you start with them, good things are going to happen. And if you start with you, good things may happen for you, but they will be the narrowest possible universe of choices, because you'll have foreclosed so many other choices. So, by the way, people who negotiate the way I suggest they do it, I call them deal jammers,
Hmm.
right? Just like a jam band musician. That's what you're trying to do. You want to be a deal jammer, not just a deal maker. You want to be a deal jammer. You can go with the flow. You can figure out the terrain. You can figure out the audience. You're fluid and flexible.
Can I steal that line? That's a great line. Deal
Okay.
jammers. I'm gonna,
Go,
gonna
go.
write that one down. But Mark, it's been a real pleasure this time together. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been super fun. I appreciate it very much. And goodbye to your audience. Just remember the soul of the deal.